This is NAI Global's Diving into Commercial Real Estate.
Hello and welcome to NAI Global's podcast series, Diving into Commercial Real Estate. I am Cliff Moskowitz, Executive Vice President of NAI Global, and we have a great guest with us today. He was our most popular speaker at our recent 2020 NAI Global Convention, Alec Pacella, President of NAI Global Pleasant Valley. Glad to have you, Alec.
I appreciate being here, Cliff.
For those of you who don't know, although many of you probably know Alec Pacella is the president of NAI NAI Pleasant Valley. He is a highly recognized, seasoned investment professional, bringing 30 years of experience as both a principal and highly successful salesperson. He focuses on the marketing and sale of institutional quality real estate assets and has completed over $500 million in investment sale transactions. As managing partner of NAI Pleasant Valley out of Northern Ohio, he directs the daily operations of this regional brokerage company. He began his career in 1989 at the former Edward D. Bartolo Corporation and joined Grubb & Ellis in Cleveland in 1994, becoming Vice President of Investment Sales in 2000. He was a regional director at First Industrial Realty Trust prior to joining NAI in 2008. So welcome, Alec. Thanks for lending us some time today.
30 years, man. I feel old now.
Tell you
Doesn't take long.
1989 is that's a long time ago. That's end of the Cold War, I think.
Thanks for kicking sand in my face.
But what that time does is give you experience, and that's why we always look to you to kind of guide us. You're a frequent speaker at NAI conventions, NAI trainings, that sort of thing. And certainly right now, given what's going on in the world, pandemic, election, we could use some of that wisdom. So glad to have you here. To share that with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
For those of you who may have tuned into Alec's presentation, but and for those of you who didn't. Alec gave a presentation that was well received at our convention that basically talked about the difficulty of valuation in a market with no transactions and a discussion about what the role of the broker can be now, given that the transaction volume is way down. So Alec, maybe we start there. We could just kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in the investment sales market generally in terms of transactions.
Sure, no, I'll be happy to. And part of the problem, Cliff, is right now there's not a whole lot going on the investment side.
Right.
And so as a transaction professional, we can make money, obviously, the easy when the market's going up. Market's hot. Market's been hot since 2013, 2014, kind of climbing up. Everyone gets on that train. I'm not saying deals are easy, but, there's plenty of liquidity, there's plenty of capital looking to invest in real estate, so market's going up. That's a good place. You can also make money on the downside, when the market's going down. Then you just got to kind of flip the telescope, look down the other end of that barrel. At that point, sellers want to get out. They're the ones that are motivated trying to get out. Assuming you can flag down capital to invest in those falling asset prices, you can make money when market's going down. The problem as a transaction professional is in the middle, in that kind of no man's land, when nothing's happening, when things are just stagnant. That's the situation that we've kind of found ourselves in, primarily thanks to COVID-19. Right about March, started out pretty good year, right? 2020 got out of the gates fairly well, and then just came to an absolute standstill. When COVID really started to rear its head, and we haven't gotten back on track. So you start thinking about that. Okay, why? What's going on here? Why are we stagnant? Well, we know why we're stagnant, because there's so much uncertainty. And you hit in your opening, you hit on okay, let's throw some throw some more gas on the fire. Let's put this in an election here that's hotly contested and obviously going to be highly uncertain. And then the COVID thing just isn't going away, right? This thing, here in Ohio, I'm in Ohio, our numbers had actually fallen under 1,000 a day, new cases, but the last week or so, they're back up. Today is almost 5,000 cases, so almost a five-fold increase in daily cases. So this thing isn't going away anytime soon. So you mix that all together, and you just have just tremendous amounts of uncertainty in the market, and that's what's creating that sluggishness, that stagnant. Buyers and sellers really don't want to move. So that's the position that we found ourselves in. But again, as a transaction professional, I got some choices, right? I could just sit on my hands and go hide under a rock and wait for the sun to shine again. Or I can figure out a way to maybe not make the transaction happen because, as I'm sure we all know, really hard to make that happen from a brokerage standpoint. We can't force a transaction to happen. But what we can do is foster communications. And so that's a lot about what I focused on during that NAI presentation. And I've actually given this presentation a couple other times, and it's been equally well received. Fostering communication. How can we get the buyer and seller not to strike a deal, not to even come to a common ground, but how can we get them to continue to communicate? Because as deal people, we all know that's where deals start. Communication, being able to foster good communication back and forth between both sides. All right, I'm going to take a breath now.
Yeah, and that brings up the point. One of the things, I think you had a chart up between buyer and seller expectations right now on pricing, and sellers still, maybe they've adjusted a little bit, but not fully. But buyers think we're going to get this huge discount, COVID, we're going to buy everything distressed. And you talked a little bit about the discrepancy between those. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my my good friend Bob White, Real Capital Analytics. It's a great source. Not making this a commercial for him, but he's kind of a go-to source in that institutional grade or near institutional grade investment sales market. He does a great job of capturing really great information. And he has, basically he's put together an index. So just like the S&P 500 is an index of the broader stock markets, he's put together an index called the Real Property Pricing Index. That's based on this huge trough of data that he's sitting on. And based on that index, like you said, there's a huge discrepancy. So the charts that I used at the NAI conference, that data was from July. Okay, that was the most recent that was available. So I just checked it before we jumped on this. Jumped on this podcast. I just checked it. In July, the gap was 27%. So there was a 27% gap between sellers' expectation of pricing as compared to buyers' expectation of pricing. So you have a huge gap you're trying to overcome. That gap has actually widened since July. It's now up to 36%. So you got a 36%, and this is for all property types, a 36% gap between where the seller's expectation is and pricing of the asset as compared to where the buyer's is. Because in a lot of the seller's minds, nothing's changed, right? My tenants are still, for the most part, paying rents, right? And I know what this property was worth last year and still in good shape, right? It's still, why should I adjust my pricing when the underlying financials, the underlying income profile of the property really hasn't changed? So therein lies the paradox or the conundrum that we're sitting in.
Mm-hmm. Well, that begs the question. So we have a 36% gap between buyer and seller pricing expectations. We have a market where almost no transactions are happening, and yet as the transaction professionals and the experts in the market, owners of real estate are going to come to us and they're going to say, what's my property worth? So given the circumstances, how can we talk intelligently about value?
couple different ways. One way is just to pontificate. That's what the broker usually does, right? Let's just wing it. let me just spit and whittle and pontificate and just throw some stuff out. That'll work for maybe a little while, but that's not going to get you very far. So the approach that I talked about during the convention was, having some framework to develop some answers. Is it going to be the answer? No, it's not going to be the answer. But at least it gives guardrails or framing to value. And so, you just put together a matrix and say, okay, what predicates value? What are the foundational things of value? Well, in an investment transaction, the foundations of value is income. The annual income that the property is generating. Typically call that net operating income. So it's all the rents, less vacancy, less expenses, what's left over, net operating income, and cap rate. And cap rate, means a lot of things to a lot of people, but cap rate is just really an annualized return. On a stock, it's a dividend, right? It's a rate, it's a percentage rate as a percent of value. So now that we know those two components, okay, if we're looking for value, we're looking for V, NOI, divided by cap rate will get you the value. So that's a kind of a standard foundational concept in investment real estate. So the problem becomes, we know what income is today, right? And the owners can very easily illustrate with us. Okay, here's what my tenants are paying in rent. Here's what my expenses are. Here's my NOI. But the problem that buyers are having is, what's that going to be next year or 3 years or 5 years down the road? What's the impact of this uncertain economy going to have on my real estate? Same thing with cap rate. Right now we know what cap rates are. Cap rates are actually a backward-looking measure, so we kind of know what they are, at least what they were, back in March. What are they going to do? What's the buyer's expectation on the rate of return that they're going to require for that real estate investment? So those are the two things that are kind of in flux here. And as those things flux, our value is going to change. So what I had talked about was developing a matrix, develop a structure. Okay, here's income today, here's cap rate today, so that means here's value today. And by today, I'm really saying, 6 months ago, when we had a good fix on these things. As income decreases, so as your NOI decreases, because most people kind of think, for most real estate sectors, that's what's going to happen, right? Rents are going to either flatten or decrease. Vacancies are probably going to increase. So either of those things is going to make your NOI drop. So you can plot that across one axis, say an x-axis, and then cap rate, we generally think they're going to increase. We've been in a pretty low level for many years now. General expectation is cap rates are probably going to increase. So you put that on a y-axis, and so now you have something to frame that discussion on value. Okay, Mr. Owner, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller, if incomes decrease by 6% and cap rates increased by 20 basis points, this would be the estimate of value. You have a conversation starter to at least keep the conversation going.
Right, and so that's very useful. And then I guess the next question is, so once you have this framework established, you have at least some guesstimate of range of value, let's call it. What can you do with that knowledge? How do you take that knowledge as a transaction professional to, let's say, owners of property in your market and lend them that expertise to help them make a decision about a property that they have or portfolio and what they should do with it? Because a lot of these owners now that are maybe not collecting rents that they were are trying to make decisions themselves. Do I hold the property? Do I pay my mortgage or not? Do I try and get rid of it now because things might get worse? How can you take the knowledge of the sort of range of value that you developed approach an owner and help him make a useful decision about what to do with their property.
And I think that's the beauty of kind of taking this type of approach, because you're not necessarily telling them, you're not sitting on one side of the table and they're sitting on the other side of the table and you're saying this is what it is. This allows you to kind of move on the same side of the table with them and saying, what do you think rents are going to do? And I understand that we're the experts, we're supposed to be able to tell them that, but they own the asset. They know what their rent profile is, they know what the outlook is, they're watching the news, they're reading reports, they will have some idea, and it allows you to say, you choose. You
Right.
choose what you think is going to happen to the rents as far as how much they're going to fall. You choose what you think is going to happen to cap rates, how much they're going to increase, and just match them up. Okay, 6% decrease in NOI, 40 basis point increase in cap rate, lining up, there's about your value. So, it allows you to work much more collaboratively with them versus, here's an opinion of value, here's the base assumptions, here you go. So, it really allows you to work together. And that's the beauty of this type of approach, I think. Put you on the same side of the table with them.
Yeah. And I would also guess, a lot of us, many of us, I'm sure, have had deals that died, that were in process down the road. COVID happened, sort of put a halt to it. So are you using this framework to sort of revisit some of those deals and say, hey, let's talk again. Let's talk about, what the property might be worth now, given the new set of circumstances. And here's some factual evidence or some a mathematical way that we can sort of calculate and look at perhaps a price adjustment.
Absolutely. That's it. It's exactly how I'm using this as a way to rekindle conversation. Is it going to restart a deal and, magic bullet? No, probably not. But at this point, again, I can sit on my hands, hide under the rock, wait for the sun to shine again, or I can try to keep that conversation going. Because if I'm sitting on my hands, waiting for the sun to shine again, maybe there's another agent out there, broker out there that's going to be able to shoehorn their way in. And so, obviously this business is all about relationships, all about, maintaining and establishing and cultivating relationships. And this is a great way to do it. And maybe along the line, you get a deal rekindled and jump started and try to get it back on track. But at least it gives you a reason, an opportunity to stay in front of that client on a regular basis.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. It's all about, having the touch points of contact where you can deliver useful information to the owners, so that when they are ready to do something, you're in front of them. So, that's certainly, a great strategy to have. I'm just going to pivot for a moment. I know on our side we've been getting calls from buyers. There's capital out there. It's been raised or is being raised to buy what people perceive as this big wave of distressed real estate coming. But on the other side, we're not seeing the sellers out there yet. Maybe the banks are giving some forbearance on their mortgages, or the sellers have some reserves, or they're not ready to sell, or they're just think that this is a bad time because value has gone down from where it was in March and they can hold on through. Um, I'm curious, are you also getting the same kind of wave of potential buyers calling you saying they want to buy distressed real estate? And when they do, what are you doing with that information? Are you putting that saying, if we hear of anything, we'll get back to you, banking it somewhere in some maybe CRM or data source? Or are you actually, taking that information based upon what their investment profile is and going to try and hunt and find them deals?
That's a great question. And yes, we absolutely are getting those calls with increasing frequency, it seems like,
Yeah.
as the days and weeks click by here, looking for, with buyers looking for distress. And you're exactly right. So far, it's not out there. I mean, we're starting to see some fringes, and I'm sure, in the big cities, New York and so on and so forth, you're seeing the same thing. We're starting to seeing some serious cracks in hospitality. It's funny because this market, it's almost like the has and the have-nots. Best of times, worst of times. Best of times. Industrial. Industrial, it is still absolutely a seller's market. Yeah, right. I mean, it's an absolute seller's market. Industrial, grocery anchored retail, absolutely a seller's market. But then on the flip side, hospitality, downtown CBD office, there's some suburban office, there's some segments that are just, but we haven't, even though those segments are really tough, I think it's going to get a lot tougher, and it has to get a lot tougher in order for the distress to really take hold. We haven't seen that yet. We certainly haven't seen it. I think we're starting to see some cracks, certainly in the hospitality side. And I'm not a hotel guy, so that's kind of foreign language to me. But we're starting to see some cracks on that, and we think it's just a matter of time before that migrates to some of the other segments. So back to your original question, what are we doing with that information? So one of the things I've always been a big proponent of is, I give, you give. So, I'll certainly take the information that they give me, and I'll give them some ideas, maybe even, some sectors or some areas, some geographic areas, depending on what their focus is, what they're looking for, that to keep an eye on it, or that I'll help them keep an eye on. But I also want to find out, what are they seeing in other markets? What are they buying? What are they seeing in, if they're looking at Indy or Detroit or St. Louis or Cincinnati or other markets? Because I want to try to gather as much, because that means they're on the ground probably, or they're scoping out deals there as well. I want to find out what's going on in those markets. So I'm always a proponent of, I'll give you information. I have no problem doing that, but it's you got to spill some back my way to help me as well. So. But like I said, for right now, we're just not seeing that that fallout like we did. Will we? We seem to be headed that way, right? 2021 could be an interesting year. But there's still liquidity. There's still good liquidity in the marketplace. This is a much different time than it was in 9 and 10. I think lenders are a lot more willing and capable of trying to work things out. But that could change. It could change very quickly here as we move toward the end of the year and then beginning of next year.
So, given the lack of transactions that are currently happening, what are some productive activities that you're doing and advising your brokers and your team to be doing right now on a daily basis to still be pushing the ball forward, even if the transactions aren't happening today?
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of times, especially in this market, Cliff, where you get complacent, the woe is me, especially if you're remote, you're not interacting with anyone except your wife and your dog and your kids that may be working on their online schooling. You develop a complacency. So we've been trying to, with our people and myself, we've been trying to make sure that our people aren't getting complacent, that they're continuing to have conversations. You're exactly right. No deal. You got that big void in transaction volume. So how you feel in that time? So we've laid out several strategies for our people. Here's some ways to use your time productively and help glean some additional information. One of the best things, I think, is property management. In this type of environment, in this type of market, property management, if you have access either in-house, if your company has a property management division, and if they don't, that's okay. I mean, I'm sure there's people in your marketplace or colleagues of yours that are involved in property management. Talk to those people. Those people are tremendous sources of information. They can tell you about rent collection levels, delinquencies, what sectors they're seeing tenants have difficulties with. Are the tenants actually occupying the space? Are they actually physically in the space, or is it just, they're paying rent, but it's dark space? Challenges that owners are having, be it from lenders or be it from tenants or be it from communities. Just they're great wealth of information, and now's a great time to mine that type of information, just to understand, just to get a better understanding. Where are we now? Where are things headed? So that, property management, top of my list. Another one is bankers. Another one is, I love speaking to lenders to find out what's going on in their worlds. What are they seeing? I'm starting to hear stories of shifting. There's some lenders that just flat aren't lending on certain product types. So finding out, why, what's behind those decisions? What's your lending ratios for Class B garden apartments versus grocery anchored shopping centers versus suburban office buildings. So getting that information directly from the source of direct lenders, that can be very valuable information. So those two are pretty high on my hit list of people that I want to try to talk to on a regular basis, just to get as much information as I can.
Yeah, those certainly are things that we're doing over here as well. What about on the data side? You mentioned Real Capital Analytics. Are there any other data sources you use to sort of maybe track mortgages? Or, are you using a trap or something like that to see where there might be some more defaults? Do you get into any of that type of analysis?
Oh yeah, no, we've been a subscriber to TREP for since the last down cycle. We really never let it go, so we've continued to subscribe to TREP, and that can be a great source of information. It's still it's exclusively in the CMBS market, so they don't go in the traditional lending areas, but within that CMBS market, it's a great resource. So we're absolutely plugged in and constantly watching their watch list and drilling down to get as much information, as much data out of that as we can. You mentioned Real Capital Analytics. That's been a big one of mine for since Bob Boy started that company probably 20 years ago. So I'm constantly following that. We're a CoStar. This is a CoStar market where CoStar is a pretty dominant data vendor for building specific information. So once a month, I'm combing through that data. We have the benefit of having a regional research person here in Cleveland. So I'm pretty friendly with her, and I'll send her an email once a month just asking for her take. She does a little kind of a one-page market summary for the whole Midwest. So I stay in touch with her and make sure I get that information on a regular basis, just to keep an eye on that. And those are probably the three of the biggest sources that we use between TREP, Real Capital Analytics, and the aggregation of CoStar data. Those are probably our three biggest ones.
That's great. Well, I know we're almost at the end here, but I do have to ask you the tough question. If you have any bold predictions for what's upcoming in 2021.
Yeah, I got a few. I think that so we're sitting here. What is this today? November. What's today? The 5th, right? The 5th. I think it's the 5th. To election plus 2 days, and we still don't have. There's no clarity yet, right? I haven't looked at the news there in a couple hours, but there's still no decision made, I assume, on our who's going to be the person running our country.
You'll know when there's a decision.
The Twitter machine will melt down, huh?
Exactly.
But I think that there could be long-term ramifications for our industry. I think we've all read the story of the platforms that both of the candidates have on. I'm talking specifically on certain tax code that maybe get rewritten or not. So that could have very far-reaching implications. So taking that aside, if we can, so we'll take that aside, take it off the table right now, because that's a lot of that's speculative, and it has to go through the House, go through the Senate, and Tax Reform Act is never a very easy thing to get accomplished. But just looking at kind of the world we're in, I think that we are in the soup here for at least another year. I think we're going to see a dramatic jump. I think a lot of companies, a lot of retailers are just trying to hang on, to get through the holiday season. That holiday season is looking increasingly bleak as we move toward it. I think January is just going to be I shudder in some ways to think what January is going to bring. In some ways, it's opportunity, right? In some ways, I think it's going to be opportunity. Like I said, in the brokerage business, you can make money when the train's going up the hill. You can make money when the train's going down the hill. And I think, first, second quarter, that train's going to be flying down the hill. And I think it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people are going to get, going to take a pretty good whack. But again, in our business, there's clearly going to be opportunity in that. So I think that, take between now and the end of the year, figure out a business plan, figure out how to get prepared for it, because once that calendar turns over to January, I think it's going to be It's going to be an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll come back and revisit your prediction maybe later in the mid next year and see where we're at. But like you said, even if things are maybe trending downwards, that might force owners or note holders into decisions, and decisions are good for brokers because that means there might have to be a wave of transactions. So, Alec, thanks for
Yep.
joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Don't want to take up too much more of your time, and we hope to have you back on another episode.
Cliff, I appreciate the opportunity. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too.